Okay, so our first new topic of the semester just happens to be where we're supposed to be anyway in the course material. This is where we're talking about editing, video editing, and it's very important that you understand why we're doing this. We've covered pre-production and we've covered production. You should know how to write a script, a basic script, how to write a proposal. These are relatively simple things to do, but you should be prepared to shoot. And you should also understand how to operate a camera at this point. And so you should have seen the camera demonstrations. You should have done this yourself in the scavenger hunt project. And you should know how to set up a microphone and how to white balance and how to handle basic lighting. You know, that's all cinematography. You should know how to compose a shot. And so if you are rusty in any of those things, you really should pick up on that. Now we're going to take it to the next step where we're going into post-production. And post-production is actually bigger than production and pre-production combined in some ways, because here you're actually building something. You're building the finished product, and that is very important because if you can have the best pieces in the world, if you don't build it, there's no point. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on from here on in. So here I'm going to give you a little bit of editing theory. And so I'm not going to get bogged down in this. I'm just going to cover the basics because really what I want to do is to demonstrate how you're going to do this, because I think you're going to find it in some ways easier than you think it is. Okay, so basically editing basics. Okay, so first of all, the first thing to remember is all footage is digital. Now, we're not going to get bogged into how great that is because I used to have to work with videotape. Videotape sucks. You'll never have to see it. You'll never even have to know about it, really. So at this point, in this point in time, all video footage is basically these non-existent files that show up in these little editing chips. Should probably have one of these. Yeah, on these little bitty thingies here, and this is nothing compared to what I used to have to lug around. Okay, so and one more thing, when I say they're digital files, that means that maybe they're on these little thingies, but they're not these little thingies. The actual footage is virtual. It doesn't really exist. It just comes from here, goes to your computer, then goes everywhere else. And so it doesn't really matter how you transport it around. There's no physical presence, which is different than the original videotape experience, because originally your camera original was the original, meaning that you would never throw away your tapes and you'd never reuse them if you actually cared about the stuff. I still have my old tapes from projects that I shot years ago because you can never get them again. You can never get that image quality again because every time you do anything to the video, take it into any editing process and beyond, it's going down a generation and you can never get that back. Whereas your footage on the digital, doesn't matter what you do with it, it's everywhere. You can store it on the cloud if you really want to do that. You can put it on a hard drive. You can do whatever you want. It's everywhere. And so as long as you're backing it up, you're all right. So remember, footage can be lost. So that's the other thing about tapes. Let's say you get a tape that's about this big. Some of our tapes used to be about that big, actually much larger. Let's say you got something like this. You can lose it, but let's be fair, it's not that hard to lose. You know, as long as you treat it carefully, you can probably find it again. If you got something like this is easier to lose. Or if you put on your computer and you don't know where you put it, you know, then it doesn't exist at all. You got to look for it. And if you haven't labeled it in any way, it could be literally impossible to find it. So yeah, make sure that you don't lose your footage. Organize everything. Create a folder hierarchy. And so you can do this on a digital hard drive, or you can set up a folder on one of the workstations. You might want to consider doing both, to be honest with you, meaning that you might want to have a folder on a workstation, but back it up somewhere too. And know what you have. Go through your footage and know what you have. Sometimes it's a good idea to name your files. I will admit that not everybody does that. It isn't necessarily 100% necessary, but it can help if you're trying to keep track of things. Anything that you do to keep track of things is worth doing. Understand the Adobe Premiere program. That's what we're going to be using. It's a very good program. I've used others. Adobe Premiere is probably the best program out there right now. There are other people that might disagree, but I like the workflow. The workflow makes sense. A lot of the other ones are based on film technology, believe it or not. And the Avid is based on film technology, which uses a workflow that really doesn't exist anymore. And Final Cut is based on another workflow that kind of dumbs down everything. And so on one hand, you don't want to walk into the cockpit of a 747 and try to figure it out. I admit that. But at the same time, you don't want to be working in a Fisher-Price toy either. So the idea is to try to understand enough about editing that you can establish a workflow that you can understand and where you have control. Okay, digital editing theory. A video file is generated from by the camera from start to finish. Let me explain what I mean by that. You're shooting a camera, you press the red button, you start recording. At that point, a digital file is created, and it will be added onto until you stop recording. Most of the time, you're going to hit that button again. It's going to establish a chunk of digital memory as your digital file. Now, if you record too long, if it goes on long enough, eventually it will say, all right, this is as big a file as I can make. It'll stop it and start another one, which is all right as long as you understand that's happening. And so in any case, a video file is generated by the camera, whatever you're recording on, and that's what that is. Now each file, let's say you've got that file, you put it into your editing system. Each file can be broken down into useful clips, and you get to decide where those are. And that doesn't happen at the file itself, it happens in the program. So you got the file outside the program, it's a bunch of ones and zeros. Bring the file inside the program, it's a movie that goes from here to here, and you want this section that you like, and you're going to mark that. And so you can mark it with using the digital notes or any way you want to. You can rename it, all those different things, but there you're renaming the clips, and you decide what those are. Now each clip has an in point and an out point. And so you're going to decide where you want the clip to begin, where you want it to end. And so beyond that, there's another clip. Before that, there's another clip. Or it could be your clip begins at the beginning of the file, depending on how you're doing it. Now, deleting a clip does not delete the file. Now, this is important to understand. Let's say you've put a clip on your timeline, and then you're afraid to delete it because you may need it again. It depends. If you plan on using it and you're sure you're going to use it, and you don't want to delete it because you don't want to find it again, you don't want to establish those in and out points, you can move it somewhere on the timeline that you're not using. Or you can put it on another timeline that you have available to bring back, and I'll explain how that works later. But here's the thing. If you hit that delete button, it's not like you're never going to get it again because the actual file that the clip came from has not been deleted. All the computer is doing with a clip is it's saying, you know, this is the part of this file that you want to look at, and whatever you do with it is up to you. Now, on the other hand, if you're in the hard drive and you delete the file, then you're in trouble because that's gone. And then suddenly all of those clips which rely on that file, they're gone too. And so I seriously suggest that you back up your files in case you or somebody else accidentally deletes them. And again, that's why you want to store your files where you know where they are and where they can't be confused with somebody else's work. Okay, again, know where your files are. I can't stress that enough. Clips are arranged on a timeline. So a timeline is where you are assembling your video. Timelines can be simple, they can be very complicated. You can modify the timeline in any number of ways. The timeline itself it's also virtual, which again is a great thing. I didn't have that when I was in your position. I had to edit onto a master tape, which was not digital, which was not virtual, and so therefore, whatever I did permanently changed that tape. And if I didn't like something I did early on, I couldn't always change it. Okay, so let's talk about timelines for a minute. Timelines can be as long as you need, which again is different than my situation used to be because I was limited to how long a tape I had to work with. And there's only so long you can edit on a tape. So believe it or not, In the video world, back in the, say, the 80s and 90s, most tapes were only 60 minutes long. And if you wanted to really do it, you get a 90-minute tape, which was a huge thing. It weighed like 10 pounds, some of these things. And sometimes that was it. You couldn't go any further than that. So what if your program is 2 hours long? Well, that could be a problem. You may have to, either the equipment itself doesn't exist, or you have to go to some other format that you can't afford to use. Okay, but neither here nor there. That's gone. Now, basically, you can make a program that runs for 3 days if you want to, if you can find a way to do it. No problem there at all, because it's all digital. Okay, timelines are measured in hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Typically, you're really working with minutes, seconds, and frames. Let's be honest. Because it could be you're making a 20-minute program. That's about average for most video work. Sometimes you're making something that's 30 seconds long. It could be that's what you're after, but that's what the timeline gives you. And so the way it's set up, you can see it from end to end, or you can zoom in on it and work on certain areas of it where you happen to be. I would suggest you do that diligently. You can remove things from the middle. So if you got, say, a 40-minute program and 20 minutes in there's something you want to get rid of, you're not married to that. You can take that out and you can basically scoot the ends together, or you can replace it with something else. You can overlay things, meaning that you got the timeline going like this from end to end. You can also put stuff above the timeline that acts as keys, like, for example, graphics and things like that, which we'll talk about in a later lecture. Audio has timelines too. Now, when you shoot footage, it's picking up the audio with it, so when you put your timeline together, you've got both audio and video on those clips, and so that's a real advantage. Now, on the other hand, let's say you want to have music that goes through the entire project. You can have that as a long file that you just sort of tuck in under there, and it works. You can mix audio timelines. You can have music and narration. You can have 3 different types of music and sound effects. You can have a timeline that's really thick, which has all these different layers of sound and video going up as high as you want. There is no limit, because the actual timeline is really only an idea. And ultimately, the timeline is exported as the final project. And so that's important to understand. When you're done, you have to create a finished product. The timeline itself is not the finished product. So rendering is when you create the finished product. So the timeline is made of individual clips from multiple files, as we said. And so once again, if one of those files gets damaged or removed, then suddenly the timeline is no longer working. It'll come to that particular place and there'll be a sign that comes up that says, I can't find the video. And that sucks. The finished product should be one complete file. And so ultimately, like, for example, if you rent a video or something like that, you're seeing it as one complete file. It's not attached to some timeline in California, when they were editing the program. Every special effect or transition is a separate file. If you do a dissolve from one video to another, that dissolve is actually another completed file. So to understand this, if you were doing a dissolve in, let's say, 1990 or something like that, you would have a source tape playing over here. You would have another source tape playing. They'd both be going through a mixer, and somebody would pull the fader bar from one to the other, and then you would have to do that as an edit. Please don't try to understand it. It doesn't make any sense. Here, it's very much like the way film used to be, where you've got a piece of film here, you got a piece of film here, you want to merge them together, you have to send them to a lab. The lab will project the first film, project the second film, hit the fader bar, and record the result. And so you'll have one projector coming up, one projector going down, and so it's created a second or a third clip, which is the transition. Then they mail that back to you and you splice it all together. That's very much like what happens in the computer, except it happens instantly and you never have to understand it. So basically, if you do a transition, it'll take both the clips, merge them together, and create a perfect transition. But the transition itself is not the same as the clips. That's a separate file that goes into this folder somewhere that you generally never see. And rendering is the process of combining all this, including all the transitions, all the special effects, all the keys. And so sometimes you can have special effects that are complex enough that the computer doesn't like to play them back on the timeline. Once you've rendered it, that's all gone. The rendered file will play back perfectly well anywhere. Rendering also establishes the final format for the program. The most common format, and the one that I'm asking you to use, is the MP4 format, which is sometimes known as H.264, and that is high definition 1920 by 1080, or you could also see this as 1080i or 1080p. That's the format that we use here. You could theoretically use something like QuickTime, something like an uncompressed AVI, but please don't for the purposes of this class. Sometimes the format is driven by the client's needs. You can also mix, the audio should be mixed as stereo. If it's not stereo, it should be mono. Both tracks should be the same, meaning that no matter what you do with video these days, there's a right hand and a left hand audio track. Make sure that there's something in each of those. So don't just mix music on one track and narration on the other, because that's just going to be confusing unless you're doing it for some specific reason. And so even if it's not stereo, it's mono, just have it left and right being the same. The finished product is often tailored for distribution, and you must understand how this is done in order to do this, because if someone says, I need this and with these specifications, you need to understand how to do it that way, and we'll be going over that as we talk about the editing program. Okay, so here we are looking at Adobe Premiere. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that Adobe Premiere is not always the most user-friendly interface you can get. And so sometimes you may open up the program and it may look like this. Sometimes it'll have clips from previous programs. This is all intended to try to make the program a little bit more user-friendly than it typically is. But it's designed to be used by individual users. The Adobe company is all about personalization. I will give them that. And to a large degree, this is actually helping. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new project. I'm just going to click the New Project button or go to File, New. And then I get this dialog box here. And we're going to go over these because I think it's kind of important. And so another thing I must stress now is that the Adobe Premiere that you're going to be using, I strongly suggest you use the edit suites that are available in the Radio Lab, and each of those is broken up into 4 screens. And so I'm going to show you, in this particular example that you're going to see, it's only one screen. So I'm going to talk about where the data appears on those screens, because I'm trying to make this as easy for you as possible. So I'm going to first give the project a name, and I am going to save this. And so I'm going to save this where my lectures are, under this class, and I'm going to make a folder for it. And the reason I'm showing you this way is because I want you to understand that you have to know where this stuff is. I'm going to call this video_demo. So I've made the folder, and then I'm going to double click on the folder. And so if you look up here, this says that it's this computer, and it's set up, in this case, on an external drive in a folder called Canvas 20, which is where I'm doing the lectures. Within the lectures folder, within this class, within a folder called Video Demo. And so if I were to store it on the desktop, heaven forbid I were to do that, then let me show you what that would actually look like real quick. If I go down here and I just grab a file here, you ever wonder where the desktop is? I'll show you where the desktop is. You would have to go into the C drive, which is where the operating system is. You would have to go under Users. You would have to go under wherever the name of the system is, and somewhere around here, you would find it. It's somewhere in there, I think. There it is, desktop. And so why am I telling you this? It's because sometimes if you have logged into the system with your username, that's going to be a completely different area than if it's under the master login, which we recommend that you use. Or if you don't specify a place to put your footage, it'll put it in the last place that was used, which could be somebody else's project. And then when they're done, they may delete everything. Or they may say, I don't recognize this file, and then delete it. Then you're in really tough shape. All right, so know where you put it. I'm going to select that folder. Now, if you look here, most of this you don't have to understand necessarily. The render engine is hardware-based. You can leave that alone. And pretty much scratch disks, about the only thing you have to understand there is that right now it's scratch disks are where they store all of your transitions and stuff like that. They should be same as project, unless you have some reason to change that. And that's basically it. So I'm just going to go ahead and never gave the project a name. I'm just going to call this project, I'm going to see, video underscore demo. Now I'm also going to warn you, if you leave it as untitled, your project will be named Untitled. Guess how many untitled projects there are in any computer? Yeah, you don't want to think about it. Okay, so this is what I'm getting here, and I'm going to go with this configuration for the moment. And right now it's not going to mean all that much because there's nothing in it to look at. Okay, so I'm going to begin by putting some footage into the system. Now right now there are no timelines, and there's nothing in the program file, so all of this stuff looks disgustingly empty. So I'm going to go here into File, and I'm just going to go Import. And I happen to have a folder set up that I was using for a project I'm currently working on. And so within there, I'm going to go into this folder called Footage. Again, it's important that you keep track of things. And I'm going to go into, oh, wrong one. I'm going to go into Shoot 2 because there was a second shoot. Now this one is an example of something that I renamed, Good Wide. Now, if you look at some of these other ones, they have names like Mix 3, Paragraph 1, MP4, and if you actually keep track of that, that's a whole lot better than some of the other names I've seen the computer generate. But I'm going to take Good Wide because I know that's good. Now, based on the thumbnail, I'm also going to take this one because that's a close-up of the same scene. So if I hold down the Control key and click on that, I can select both of those. And so I'm only going to be using these two clips for the moment because I want to demonstrate what we're doing. So if I hit Open, suddenly those clips wind up here. Now this window down here is called the Project window, and in the edit systems you'll be working with, the Project window should be on your right-hand screen. I'm sorry, on your left-hand screen. And that's where your clips are going to be stored. And you can see a little icon there, and they're stored by name. And again, if you rename them, that's so much the better. Now on the middle screen, you have your timeline window. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Good Wide, and I'm just going to drag it into the timeline. Now the moment I do that, all kinds of things light up. Let me explain. To start with, this is your timeline. You see this little bitty handle here? That's your playhead. Oh, and this floating window is your little television set. That's your project window, your project monitor. And in your systems that you're going to be using, that is on the top screen. So as you play the video down here, you're watching it on the top screen, full screen. And that's very good. I don't really like editing on a laptop that often because I don't get to see the video in the best possible detail. Now on your right-hand screen, you're going to have your scopes, which I have over here, which give you some idea what the video is doing. That's your waveform monitor scope, and a few others. And so we're going to stick with this. And also one other thing, if you click on the clip in the timeline, you will get your edit controls, which allow you to do certain things to it, which we're not really going to talk about in this lecture. So all I want to talk about now is the very basics of what you're going to be editing. Basically, we're going to be covering the timeline and how you can manipulate the video. Now, what we have, and if you look on the timeline down here, we have this little bar. If we drag the bar, make it wider, we're seeing more of the timeline. If we compress the bar, we're seeing less. And so you can get this timeline down to frames, where each of these little divisions is literally 1/30th of a second. You can also get this timeline out, so this is covering 13 minutes, and if there were more footage here, you could get it out even further than that, in which case the slightest movement is taking you several seconds. So I advise you to use this to your advantage. So right now, we're going to start by looking at this one clip, and this is a camera original. So I'm going to take this all the way back to the beginning, and this is basically just a prepared speech that this woman read. She did a very good job. I was very grateful to have her working for me. And so I'm going to hit the play button, and you can see she hasn't even started yet. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is all the stuff that you're never going to use.
Ready? Welcome to the experience. Ready?
All right, so that's a spoiled take.
Welcome to the experience. Your participation in this experiment is voluntary, but once fully engaged, you will be committed to completing the simulation. Failure to do so can result in serious injury. The facility and its personnel are secure and top secret. To proceed, you must have a blue priority clearance or higher. What you are about to experience will seem totally real. For your own safety, follow your guide's instructions at all times. Be aware that any attempt to resist our control.
Okay, so I'm going to look at this one more time. You see this little gap here where there's nothing going on? I'm assuming this is the second tape. Right now, I'm only looking at the beginning part of what she said, so I just want to use that part because we don't want to get in the weeds here. I think this is when she started again. Let's look at that.
Welcome to the experience. Your participation in this experiment is voluntary, but once fully engaged, you will be committed to completing the simulation. Failure to do so can result in serious injury.
All right, so let's say that that's the part that we want to lead with. So we know we want this, but we know we don't want this. And so we're going to remove that whole section from the timeline. And so there's a very easy way to do that. Now, if you're using your remote control jog shuttle, which I'm going to show you during the lab session, there's a button that says cut, and that will cut this. If you're not, what you're going to want to do is hit the C button on the keyboard, or look for your tools and look for the razor blade, which is over here. So I'm just going to hit the C button, and you notice the razor blade lights up. I'm going to put the razor blade near that pointer and click on it. Once I've done that, now there are two clips. And so this clip is different than this one. And so then, in order to drop the razor blade, I have to hit the little arrow there or hit the V button to get back to my pointer. So my pointer, I can move this around, or I can just hit the delete button and make it go away. And so now the clip begins with this. And so we got a whole lot more going on. So I'm going to go to where the end of this is.
Within the experience is classified as confidential. Divulging any aspect of it will result in prosecution.
Okay, so let's say that we keep that much, and we'll play it simpler. Let's say I just want to look at this right now. I hit the C button real quick, I chop it, and I hit the V button, and I just move this aside. Now, right now what I want to do is I want to work with this, but I want to keep this because I may need it later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch this out, and I'm going to move this over here. And the reason I do that is because I want to be able to work with this and maybe come back to this later. Now, there's another way I could do this. There's another way I could do this. I'm going to show you real quick because I think it's important that we cover this. If you look at the timeline name, it is called Good Wide. Now, if you look over here, these icons don't look very different, but they are, meaning that the ones with the little waveform there are the clips. The ones with a little timeline image are the timelines. So I'm going to right-hand click, and I'm going to rename this timeline, and I'm going to call this main timeline. And so then I'm going to make a new timeline. File new, sequence. This is called a sequence. And I'm just going to call this bin. So I'm going to say that anything that I am not currently using goes in the bin. And so what I could do is I could drag this whole clip into the bin. Now when I do that, and this is an important safeguard of this program, if I didn't set the settings exactly the same as the footage, here's where I can make up for it. I can keep whatever those settings are. Now if I did set the settings, I may want to impose that in the clip, but if I didn't, I just want to change the timeline to match the settings. 9 times out of 10, that's what you do. So then you've got the main and you've got the bin. And so these are the 2 timelines that we're currently working with. So I'm going to go to the bin here, and I'm going to get rid of this because I don't need to do that again. So this is the part that I'm not using. This is the part I selected. So I'm going to right-hand click on that, and I'm going to go to Cut. Then I'm going to go to Bin, and I'm just going to click over here somewhere and hit Control V or Paste. And so there that is. So if I need it, I can go back and get it. And so whatever I did to that is already there. So this is my clip. I could even go here and rename the clip, and I can call that wide shot. And so that clip is called wide shot. Now it hasn't changed the name of the file, it's just given me a clip called wide shot. And so the same clip is there. And now if you notice, if you go to bin, it didn't change there because that's not where we're using it. But if I were to move that over there, it would change it at that point. So then I'm going to bring in my other shot here, which is this. I'm just going to drag that in here, and let's see what we got there. There, this is the same thing in close-up. And I think you can see it's a little bit... Okay, so again, this is raw footage. And I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit so we can get a really good look at it.
Welcome to the experience. Your participation in this experiment is voluntary, but once fully engaged, you will be committed to completing the simulation. Failure to do so can result in serious injury. The facility and its personnel are secure and top secret. To proceed, you must have a blue priority clearance or higher. What you're about to experience will seem totally real.
Okay, so I'm going to take it from that point. What you're about to experience should seem totally real. And so I'm going to park the timeline there. I'm going to hit the C button, and I'm going to knock that. Then, at this point, I'm just going to get rid of this part because I don't really need it. Now, if I did, I could also stretch the clip and bring it back. Or I hit Control Z and unstretch it. And so now we've got 2 clips on the same timeline, and what I want to do is I want to combine those. And so I want to find the point in the script where she says that. What you're about to experience will seem totally real. So I don't have to be this complicated, but let's say that I find it here, because I can move the timeline relatively small increments.
Be aware that any attempt to resist our control could result in brain damage and possible insanity. I'm required by law to warn you of these potential risks. From this point onward, we cannot guarantee your safety.
Okay, maybe I missed it. Okay.
The facility and its personnel are secure and top secret. To proceed, you must have a blue priority clearance or higher. What you're about to experience will seem totally...
Okay, that's where it starts. Okay, so what I've done is I've established where in this clip she says the same line. So therefore, if I take my my little razor blade there and I chop that and go back to V, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, which is the rest of that, I'm going to move it over here, and then I'm going to take this, which is the close-up, and I'm just going to smash those together. And so this is going to be the result.
And its personnel are secure and top secret. To proceed, you must have a blue priority clearance or higher. What you're about to experience will seem totally real. For your own safety, follow your guide's instructions at all times. Be aware that any attempt to resist our control could result in brain damage or possible insanity.
Okay, so I'm going to put another chop mark there and hit the V. And so, and at this point, let's say I want to get rid of these 2. So I can cut those and I can put those in the bin. And usually I put everything in the bin to start with, And then I just bring stuff that I want to work with especially onto the main timeline. And then I can just drag these to the beginning just by highlighting them and dragging them. And let's just put in one more clip, which isn't there yet. So I'm going to import something else. And I want to import the extreme close-up, which I might not even use. Let's see what that looks like. So if I drag that in here, let's see what we got here. I'm not even sure this is worth putting in there. Oops.
This is your last opportunity to disengage. Treatment will begin in 5, 4.
Okay, so let's say I just take it right to there. And I get rid of this. And this, by the way, is intended to be part of a virtual reality experience, which I'm working on. And really, it's none of this is real. It's just a kind of a joke, and we recorded in the studio. But let's see how those go together.
Results of brain damage or possible insanity.
Oops.
This is your last opportunity.
Okay, so I got some cleanup work to do there. Also, it didn't really work the way it was supposed to. That's supposed to be a closer cut. So let me show you what we can do. I'm just going to go ahead and move that in point a little bit in so that the script matches.
This is your last opportunity.
And now, and I'm going to go up to Effects Controls, and I'm just going to scale the video in a little bit. Just by bringing it in like that. And let's see what that does.
Possible insanity. This is your last opportunity to disengage. Treatment will begin in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Okay, and that's where the script would end. And I'm just going to chop that, get rid of that. And so this becomes our finished product, such as it is. So basically I'm cutting together the wide shot, the close-up, and finally the extreme close-up, which, and this isn't how the final version ended up looking, but that's pretty much a very simple editing timeline. And then to export it, I would just go to File, Export, and this would do the rendering. I'm going to export media, that's what it's called. Then I get this dialog box here. Now in this particular case, it was set up for something else. Under Format, I'm going to have to select H.264. And once I do that, you'll notice under the summary, it's 1920 by 1080, and it's going to save it as an MP4 file, which right there it is. So if I click on that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it where the other stuff is, under 303 and under Video Demo. And I'm just going, right now it's named after the timeline. I'm just going to call this Test. And I'm going to hit Save. And I'm going to show you the way I like to do it. I'm going to hit the Q, because you can set up more than one render to happen, because you don't have to be there while the rendering is happening. What it'll do is it'll open up this secondary program called Media Encoder, which does nothing but render. You don't have to do anything else with this. But when you set that up, it will create this window. And it will sort of summarize your settings, including where it's going to save it. And if you hit this little button here, it will start to do its thing. And you can see down here where it's rendering, you can even get a little picture of it. And so there's the close-up part. And we won't bother playing all this back. And then it goes to the extreme close-up. And that's basically it. And so then it's done. It says done. The little green check mark is there. Close the program because you don't need it anymore. So then to show you what that does, if I'm still in the program, if I import it, and at this point I'm going to go to where we're working, and under 303, and then that'd be Video Demo, and there is my test. If I import that, then you'll see, voila, that is the finished video. And if I scrub through it, you can see there's no longer 3 files, but 1. And it should be correct. And so that would be something that you would send to the client for approval. Or, if you look at it, you can play it. And you can see it will open up the media player.
Welcome to the experience.
And this is your final video.
Voluntary, but once fully engaged, you will result in serious injury.
And you can skip through it.
To experience will seem totally real.
And so this is your final version. And so pretty much that is what you would have to work with. So what I'm going to ask you to do in the coming week is to shoot a short scene where you will have at least 3 shots. It could be wide shot, medium shot, close-up, or it could be 3 separate events that you're putting together. Put them together in a timeline, and then render it out for me. That's what I'm asking you to do. And we'll talk about this during the lab session.